From the frozen wilderness of Alaska to the deserts of the Southwest, and from the rugged West Coast to the dense skylines of the East, the United States is building something massive across every one of its regions. Megaprojects are rising everywhere. Multi-billion-dollar megabuilds are cutting through mountains, stretching across rivers, and transforming entire cities. Stay tuned as we move across the 50 states to bring you the biggest megaprojects in every U.S. state. We start in New York, the city with the most iconic skyline in the world. From the Empire State Building to the Brooklyn Bridge to the Freedom Tower, every generation of New York has added something the rest of the world stops to look at. And right now, in the middle of some major political changes, New York is powering ahead with its biggest infrastructure push in a generation. Hudson Yards, a brand new $25 billion neighborhood built over a live rail yard on the west side of Manhattan, has already changed what the skyline looks like. JFK Airport, which has embarrassed this city for decades, is being completely rebuilt. 2 brand new terminals are opening in 2026 as part of a $19 billion overhaul that will make JFK one of the best international airports in the world by the time it's finished. Penn Station, the busiest rail hub in the Western Hemisphere, finally has a construction start date of 2027 for a full redesign that will replace what has been called a national embarrassment for 50 years. But underneath all of that, New York is dealing with its most urgent problem. 2 rail tunnels built in 1910 carry every single Amtrak and NJ transit train into Manhattan. When Sandy hit in 2012, seawater poured into both of them, and the damage has been building ever since. Engineers have been warning for years that if one of those tunnels goes down, the entire Northeast Corridor goes with it, taking Boston, Philadelphia, and Washington off the rail map simultaneously. The $16 billion Gateway program is the answer. 2 new tunnels bored beneath the Hudson, a full rehabilitation of the existing ones once the new pair opens, and enough capacity to double the number of trains coming into Penn Station. Construction is active on 5 of the 10 project segments right now. Tunnel boring machines are being assembled at the New Jersey portal, and the whole thing is expected to be done by 2035. It nearly didn't happen at all. One governor killed an earlier version of the project in 2010 and handed back $271 million in federal funding that had already been committed. It took 13 more years to actually break ground. Those tunnels run under the Hudson River, which means the rest of this story picks up on the other side. Those tunnels don't just connect 2 states, they connect the most economically important corridor in the Western Hemisphere, and most of the construction is happening on the New Jersey side. But New Jersey is more than a footnote to New York's story. 9 million people live here, more per square mile than any other state in the country. And for decades, the infrastructure holding all of that together has been underfunded, overloaded, and falling behind. That is changing fast. Newark Liberty Airport is the most visible example. For years, it was the airport you booked when every other flight was full, notorious for delays, confusing terminals, and a general sense that nobody had touched the place since the 1980s. Then in 2023, a brand new $2.7 billion Terminal A opened and was immediately named the best new airport terminal in the world by Skytrax. Now, a $3.5 billion replacement air train system is under construction, set to open in 2030 with capacity for 50,000 daily riders, up from the current 33,000. A new Terminal B is in design. The whole airport is being rebuilt piece by piece under a long-term vision plan that will make Newark unrecognizable within a decade. Then there is the Port Authority's $45 billion capital plan, approved at the end of 2025, which funds the next 10 years of construction across airports, bridges, tunnels, and transit across both New York and New Jersey. Sitting inside that plan is the $11 billion replacement for the Midtown Bus Terminal in Manhattan, a 75-year-old building that processes over 200,000 passengers a day and whose primary users are New Jersey commuters who have been waiting for a replacement since before some of them were born. New Jersey rarely ends up on lists of the world's tallest or most expensive. However, It is building the infrastructure that keeps the Northeast moving. New York and New Jersey are fixing the foundations of the oldest infrastructure in the country. But head south to Texas, and the story is something else entirely. Down there, they're not fixing anything. They're just building bigger. New York and New Jersey are fixing the foundations of the oldest infrastructure in the country. Head south to Texas, and the story is completely different. Down here, they're not repairing what they have. They're building things that have never existed before. Texas is the 8th largest economy in the world, bigger than Canada, South Korea, and Australia, and it has been growing so fast for so long that its infrastructure has been sprinting just to keep up. Houston is the 4th largest city in America, and its highway system has been chronically overloaded for decades. Roads built for a city half its current size now carry hundreds of thousands of vehicles a day through one of the most congested corridors in the country. TxDOT's answer is the North Houston Highway Improvement Project, a $13 billion reconstruction of I-45 and the entire downtown freeway network, adding managed lanes, rerouting major sections of highway, and rebuilding the infrastructure that holds the city together. Construction is already active on the first segments, running as part of an $85 billion statewide transportation program that covers roads, bridges, and major projects across the whole state. While Houston is rebuilding its roads, the rest of Texas is becoming one of the most important semiconductor manufacturing hubs in the world. Samsung committed $40 billion to build a brand new chip campus in Taylor, northeast of Austin, with 2 advanced fabs under construction and the first expected to reach production in 2026. Texas Instruments announced $60 billion across 7 fabs in Texas and Utah, with a 4-fab mega site already rising in Sherman. Elon Musk announced plans for what he called the Terafab in Austin, a facility that would bring the entire chip production process under one roof for SpaceX and Tesla. And then there is the bullet train. Texas Central has been trying to connect Dallas and Houston by high-speed rail since 2009, a 240-mile route, 90 minutes end-to-end, starting at $10 billion and now past $30 billion after years of ownership changes, land disputes, investor departures, and a federal grant cancellation in 2025. As of now, the lead investor insists it is shovel-ready, with station sites secured in both cities and roughly 500 of the 2,000 land parcels along the route acquired. Whether it gets built is still an open question, but the fact that it has survived this long says a lot about how seriously Texas is taking the question of what comes after the highway. Everything really is bigger in Texas, but head further west, and you find states making bets that make even Texas look like a warm-up act. California is the 5th largest economy on the planet. 40 million people live here, more than in all of Canada. Its ports handle more cargo than any other state. Its tech industry changed the world twice over, and for decades, getting around it has been a nightmare. Los Angeles sits at the center of one of the worst traffic problems in the country, a metro area of 13 million people built almost entirely around the car, where a 10-mile commute can take an hour and a half. LAX, the airport that serves it, has been one of the most chaotic travel experiences in America, a congested tangle of roads and terminals that nobody could love. A $30 billion modernization program is changing that. A new automated people mover connecting all terminals to each other and to LA's metro rail system is nearly complete. 4 terminals have been fully renovated. A consolidated rental car facility eliminates 3,200 daily shuttle trips from the airport's central area. Roadwork connecting the airport to surrounding streets is racing to finish before the 2028 Summer Olympics arrive, when Los Angeles will be hosting the world and cannot afford for LAX to look the way it used to. The Olympics deadline is driving construction across the whole city. LA Metro is spending over $40 billion to build, extend, and modernize rail lines across the region, with multiple projects timed to open before the Games. New stations, new lines, and new connections are going in simultaneously across a city that built its identity around highways and is now making a serious attempt to give people an alternative. But California's most controversial project has nothing to do with Los Angeles. Somewhere in the Central Valley, between Fresno and Bakersfield, Workers are building viaducts, bridges, and grade separations for a high-speed rail line that was supposed to connect San Francisco to Los Angeles in 2 hours and 40 minutes. Californians voted for it in 2008 when the project was estimated to cost $33 billion. Construction started in 2015. As of now, $13.8 billion has been spent, not a single meter of track has been laid, and the latest cost estimate is $126 billion. The original completion date was 2022. The current target for the first operational segment is 2033, and that is widely considered optimistic. In June 2025, the federal government released a report calling the project non-compliant with grant agreements and recommending termination of $4 billion in federal funding. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy followed through in July, canceling the grants. Governor Newsom called it illegal and vowed to continue. California committed $1 billion a year through 2045 from its Cap and Invest program to keep funding it. Track laying is now scheduled to begin in 2026. Whether this project ever reaches San Francisco is a question nobody can honestly answer. What's certain is that California has already spent more money building it than most countries spend on their entire infrastructure in a decade, and it is still going. California is betting its future on a train that may or may not ever be finished. Cross the state line into Nevada, and you find a different kind of rail story, one that is actually on schedule. Las Vegas has always been the city that builds things nobody else would attempt. A $2 billion football stadium with a retractable roof in the middle of the desert. The MSG Sphere, a 366-foot-tall ball covered in the world's largest LED screen, sitting just off the strip and visible from aircraft coming into land. A city that went from a dusty railroad stop to one of the most visited places on Earth by simply deciding it would, and then building whatever it took to make that happen. Nevada doesn't have the population of California or the industrial base of Texas. What it has is Las Vegas, which generates more construction ambition per square mile than almost anywhere in the country. The Raiders Stadium opened in 2020 at $1.9 billion, setting a record as the most expensive entertainment venue in Vegas history. The Sphere broke that record 3 years later at $2.3 billion. Both of those projects are already done. Nevada is already moving on to the next thing. Brightline West is the most consequential project Nevada has seen in decades. A 218-mile high-speed rail line running in the median of Interstate 15 all the way from Las Vegas to Rancho Cucamonga in Southern California, where passengers connect to LA's Metrolink network. Trains will run at 200 miles per hour, cutting a 4-hour drive down to about 2 hours. Construction began in 2024. The Las Vegas station site south of the Strip is already rising, the parking garage taking shape in 2026, and civil work along the I-15 corridor is accelerating through Nevada and into California simultaneously. Brightline secured $3 billion in federal grants and $3.5 billion in private activity bonds to fund the $12 billion project, and the target opening is 2028, timed to coincide with the Los Angeles Olympics. What makes Brightline West different from California's high-speed rail project just across the state line is that it is privately funded and privately operated. There is no state legislature voting on it every 2 years. No federal administration deciding whether to cancel the grants on political grounds. A company built Brightline in Florida proved the model works and is now applying it at much higher speeds in the desert. The I-15 corridor between Las Vegas and Los Angeles is one of the most heavily driven routes in America, carrying millions of cars a year between two of the country's biggest entertainment destinations. If any privately funded passenger rail project in the U.S. was ever going to work, this is probably it. Nevada is building a train across the desert to connect two cities. Cross into Arizona, and the project under construction, there isn't connecting cities. It's trying to decide who controls the future of the entire global technology industry. In 2020, TSMC announced it was building a single semiconductor fab in the desert north of Phoenix. The investment was $12 billion. Nobody fully grasped at the time what that announcement would eventually become. 5 years later, TSMC Arizona is the largest foreign direct investment in a greenfield project in American history, with total committed investment now sitting at $165 billion. What started as one fab has grown into a planned complex of 6 semiconductor fabs, 2 advanced packaging facilities, and a dedicated research and development center, all on 1,100 acres outside Phoenix. The first fab came online in late 2024, producing 4-nanometer chips and making Arizona home to some of the most advanced semiconductor manufacturing outside of Taiwan. The second fab completed construction in 2025 and is being equipped for 3-nanometer production, now expected to begin ahead of its original 2028 schedule due to surging AI-related demand. A third fab broke ground in April 2025. A fourth is in permitting. TSMC's CEO has said publicly that when the full complex is complete, roughly 30% of the world's most advanced chips will be made in Arizona. The reason this happened here and why it matters beyond Arizona is a combination of geopolitics and necessity. The vast majority of cutting-edge chips are made in Taiwan, a situation that became uncomfortable as tensions between Taiwan and China intensified over the past decade. America's entire defense industry, tech sector, and consumer electronics supply chain depends on chips that come from one island in the Pacific. TSMC Arizona is the answer to that problem, backed by $6.6 billion in Federal CHIPS Act grants and $5 billion in loan guarantees. Building these fabs in the U.S. costs 4 to 5 times more than building them in Taiwan, partly because of labor costs, partly because the skilled workforce had to be trained from scratch. TSMC sent workers to Taiwan for 12 to 18 months of training before bringing them back to run the Arizona lines. Beyond TSMC, Arizona's construction scene is moving fast across multiple fronts. Intel has its own major fab expansion underway in Chandler. Data centers are rising across the Phoenix metro at a pace that has strained the state's water and power infrastructure. The desert is an unlikely place for a semiconductor revolution, but that is exactly what is happening here. Most people picture New Mexico as a place of red mesas, chili farms, and Breaking Bad filming locations. What it has quietly become is the site of the largest renewable energy project in the Western Hemisphere. Sunzaya Wind and Transmission is a $11 billion project that has spent the last 2 years planting nearly 1,000 wind turbines across the high plains of central New Mexico. The wind farm, spread across Lincoln, Torrance, and San Miguel counties, generates 3,500 megawatts of power when running at full capacity. To get that power to the people who need it, Pattern Energy built a 550-mile high-voltage direct current transmission line running from the wind fields across New Mexico and into Arizona, terminating south of Phoenix. From there, the electricity feeds into the western grid and flows toward California, which has committed to 100% clean energy and desperately needs the supply. Planning for Sunzaya began in the early 2000s. It took 20 years to get through permitting, environmental reviews, tribal consultations, and legal challenges. 2 Native American tribes, the Tohono O'odham Nation and the San Carlos Apache, filed for an injunction to stop the transmission line's construction, arguing their sacred sites and ancestral lands hadn't been adequately considered. A federal court denied the injunction in 2024, and the Ninth Circuit Court later reversed that decision, sending parts of the case back for further review in 2025. Construction continued regardless. The transmission line reached completion ahead of the wind farm, and the turbines are expected to be fully operational by 2026, powering around 1.2 million homes. New Mexico didn't build this project because it needed the power. It built it because the wind in its central plains is among the strongest and most consistent in the country, and because someone finally figured out how to get it to the people 4 states away who do. 20 years of effort to run power lines across the desert. That's the scale of patience required to change an energy grid. Colorado has a water problem that has been building quietly for decades. The Colorado River, which supplies drinking water to 7 states and 40 million people, has been shrinking. Lake Powell and Lake Mead both dropped to historic lows in recent years. Climate scientists have been warning for a generation that the West is drying out, and the Front Range of Colorado, where most of the state's population lives, has been growing fast enough that its existing water supply was already stretched thin before the drought got serious. The answer, at least for northern Colorado, is the Chimney Hollow Reservoir. 20 years in the making, the project finally broke ground in 2021 and completed construction in December 2025, becoming the tallest new dam built in the United States in a quarter century. A 360-foot rock-filled dam west of Loveland, holding 90,000 acre-feet of water drawn from the Colorado River, designed to supply reliable water to 11 communities and nearly 1 million people along the Front Range for generations. Then, almost immediately after completion, they found uranium in it. Workers discovered that the granite quarried from the construction site to build the dam contained naturally occurring uranium. The entire dam was built from this rock. Northern water paused, filling the reservoir, while scientists assessed whether the water passing through the granite embankment would pick up dangerous levels of radiation. After months of testing and analysis, officials concluded the water could be safely treated at existing plants and began filling the reservoir in early 2026. Starting with a cautious 1,500 acre-feet to monitor uranium concentrations before proceeding. Denver's own water story is running alongside this. The Gross Reservoir expansion in Boulder County is raising an existing dam from 340 feet to 471 feet, more than doubling its storage capacity to secure Denver's water supply through the middle of the century. Colorado is also in the middle of a major urban redevelopment push, with the River Mile project transforming 62 acres along the South Platte River in downtown Denver, and Ball Arena undergoing a large-scale mixed-use redevelopment around it. But the water infrastructure is the story that everything else depends on. Utah is one of the fastest-growing states in the country. Its population has increased by nearly 20% in the last decade, driven by tech industry migration into the Salt Lake City corridor, a stretch that has been nicknamed Silicon Slopes because of the density of technology companies that have set up there. More people means more roads, more water, more power, and more of everything that keeps a city running. The Utah Department of Transportation has been in a near-continuous state of major construction for years, widening I-15 and expanding interchange after interchange across Salt Lake County. The Bangerter Highway project, converting the last remaining signalized intersections into full interchanges at a cost of over $400 million, is wrapping up in 2025 after more than a decade of work. I-215 reconstruction, a $190 million repaving and drainage overhaul covering 22 bridges, is underway. These are not glamorous projects, but in a metro area growing as fast as Salt Lake City, keeping the roads functional is a genuine engineering challenge. Then there is the Salt Lake Temple. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints closed its 130-year-old temple in December 2019 for what was described as a seismic renovation and interior upgrade. What happened next was considerably more ambitious than a renovation. Engineers drilled more than 2.5 miles of holes through the temple's granite towers, inserted post-tension cables pulled to 500,000 pounds of force, and effectively rebuilt the foundation using a base isolation system that will allow the entire building to move as a single unit during an earthquake. An underground expansion added 100,000 square feet of space. The original completion date was 2024, then 2025. The current estimate is 2026, with a public open house planned for 2027. For members of the church, this is the most sacred building in the world. For engineers, it is one of the most technically complex historic preservation projects in the country. Portland has been drinking water directly from the Bull Run watershed in the Mount Hood National Forest for over 130 years. The water is cold, clean, and gravity-fed from reservoirs in the Cascade Mountains. For most of that history, it was considered so pure it didn't need filtration. Federal law eventually caught up with that assumption, and the EPA mandated that Portland install filtration to remove cryptosporidium, a waterborne parasite that the existing system cannot reliably eliminate. The deadline was 2027. Bull Run Filtration Project is Portland's $2.1 billion answer to that mandate. a new filtration facility in East Multnomah County, connected by miles of underground pipeline to the existing water conduits, designed to treat the city's entire water supply before it reaches taps. Construction broke ground in June 2024. By January 2025, it had already been shut down. Residents of the rural community near the filtration site appealed the land use permit, arguing the county hadn't adequately evaluated the project's impact on natural resources. Oregon's Land Use Board of Appeals sided with them and sent the permit back to Multnomah County for reevaluation. Construction stopped for 5 months while the city worked through the process again. Multnomah County reapproved the permit in June 2025. Opponents appealed again. Construction resumed in July 2025 and is currently active, with pipeline installation underway along Dodge Park Boulevard and tunneling machines working underground to connect the facility to the existing water system. The city has asked the state for a deadline extension to 2029 to account for the lost time. Portland has been trying to build this filtration plant in various forms since the early 2000s. The cost has quadrupled since the first estimate in 2017, from $500 million to $2.1 billion, largely because of design changes, inflation, and the accumulated delays from the legal fight. A city of 650,000 people, still working on complying with a federal safety mandate that was issued years ago, held up by a land use dispute about what counts as a natural resource. Oregon in a nutshell. The West is where America's most ambitious bets are being placed, but come back down south, and you find a region that has quietly become one of the fastest growing construction zones in the entire country. In October 2018, Hurricane Michael made landfall near Panama City as a Category 5 storm with winds reaching 160 miles per hour. Tyndall Air Force Base, sitting directly in its path, was effectively erased. Nearly 500 buildings destroyed, 11,000 personnel evacuated. Fighter jets scrambled out before the storm hit, but the hangars, dormitories, training facilities, roads, and utilities were gone. When the Air Force Secretary arrived to survey the damage, she told the engineers on site not to rebuild what had been there. Build what the Air Force actually needs going into the future. What followed is the largest military construction project in the United States, a $5 billion reconstruction of Tyndall from the ground up, with every new building designed to survive a direct hurricane hit, built to house the F-35 Lightning II, and incorporating renewable energy, smart-based technology, and nature-based coastal defenses along its 40 miles of shoreline. 49 military construction projects are underway simultaneously. By early 2025, 7 had been completed. The Security Forces campus finished in 2025. The chapel and community commons facilities are expected in 2026. Full completion is targeted for late 2026, making it a 7-year rebuild of an entire military installation from scratch. While Tyndall is being rebuilt in the Panhandle, Central Florida is dealing with a more familiar problem. Interstate 4, the main artery through Orlando connecting Tampa to Daytona Beach, runs through some of the most congested road in America. The stretch near Disney World and the theme park corridor routinely backs up for miles in both peak season and on ordinary weekday mornings. Florida launched the Moving I-4 Forward program, a $2.5 billion series of projects adding express lanes and widening the corridor from Polk County through Orange County. The accelerated start phase opened 8 months ahead of schedule in 2025. The full program runs to 2031, adding 2 new express lanes in each direction across the busiest stretch of the corridor. Florida's population keeps growing, which means the moment construction wraps up, the roads will be filling up again. Atlanta is the engine of the American South. Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, sitting 8 miles southwest of downtown, has been the world's busiest passenger airport since 1998. Last year, it handled over 108 million passengers. For context, that is more people than the entire population of France passing through a single airport in a single year. Keeping Hartsfield-Jackson functional at that scale requires constant construction. The airport never really stops building, A $6 billion capital improvement program has been underway for years, covering new concourses, runway extensions, terminal upgrades, and cargo facilities. The most technically ambitious piece right now is the Concourse D expansion, a $1.4 billion project that has to widen a 40-year-old concourse without shutting it down for a single day. The engineering solution involved building 19 prefabricated modules off-site, then transporting them one by one to the concourse and attaching them to the existing structure while passengers walked underneath. By early 2025, 10 of the 19 modules were in place. When complete in 2029, Concourse D will be 29 feet wider, 18 feet taller, and able to accommodate the largest aircraft in commercial service. Seating will increase by 1,000. Restroom capacity will double, and airlines will finally be able to pull wide-body jets up to gates that were designed for a different era. Beyond the airport, Georgia has been building fast across manufacturing and logistics. Hyundai's $7.6 billion electric vehicle plant in Bryan County opened in 2024 as the largest manufacturing facility in the state's history. The Port of Savannah, already the third busiest container port in the U.S., has been expanding its capacity continuously. The state's construction boom has been driven by a combination of population growth, supply chain reshoring, and a decade of aggressive economic development that has attracted more manufacturing investment than almost any other southern state. Charlotte is the fastest-growing major city in the Southeast, and Charlotte Douglas International Airport is struggling to keep up with it. CLT is already one of the 10 busiest airports in America, an American Airlines hub connecting the Southeast to the world. It was built for a city much smaller than the one it now serves, and on busy travel days, the signs show it. Two simultaneous projects are changing that. The terminal lobby expansion, a $608 million renovation that added 175,000 square feet and completely rebuilt the security, baggage, and ticketing areas, wrapped up in September 2025 after 6 years of construction. Walking through CLT now feels fundamentally different from 3 years ago. The fourth parallel runway is the bigger project, a $1 billion, 10,000-foot runway currently under construction west of the existing center line, designed to handle the largest commercial jets flying today. Grading is running through mid-2026, concrete paving begins this year, and the runway is scheduled to open in the fall of 2027. When it does, Charlotte will have the capacity to handle the traffic it is already seeing, let alone the growth coming next. The airport also has to renumber all its existing runways ahead of the new one opening, because the geometry of 4 parallel strips requires new designations for every single one of them. A logistical operation involving over 120 physical markings and updates to FAA aviation charts. North Carolina's construction story extends well beyond Charlotte. The Research Triangle has become one of the most active technology and life sciences construction zones in the country, with data centers, pharmaceutical manufacturing, and university expansion happening simultaneously across Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. The state received major semiconductor investment as part of the CHIPS Act reshoring wave, and its population growth has driven a wave of highway and transit investment that shows no sign of slowing. South Carolina has quietly become one of the most important manufacturing states in the country. BMW has been building cars in Spartanburg since 1994, and that facility is now the largest BMW plant in the world by production volume. Volvo's American headquarters and primary production plant is in Berkeley County. Mercedes-Benz Vans builds Sprinters in North Charleston. The state has built an entire industrial ecosystem around European automotive manufacturing over 3 decades, and it is still expanding. BMW announced a $1.7 billion investment in its Spartanburg plant to add electric vehicle production capacity, with construction underway through the mid-2020s. Volvo has been expanding its Berkeley County facility steadily. On the energy side, the Dominion Energy VC Summer Nuclear Station sits in Jenkinsville, though its story is one of the most cautionary construction tales in American history. 2 new reactors were started in 2013 at an estimated cost of $11 billion. By 2017, Costs had ballooned to $25 billion. The primary contractor, Westinghouse, had filed for bankruptcy, and the project was abandoned with $9 billion already spent and nothing to show for it. The political fallout changed state energy law, led to executive resignations, and became a national case study in how nuclear megaprojects can collapse. What South Carolina is building now is more grounded. The Port of Charleston has been expanding its container capacity, deepening its harbor to handle the new generation of ultra-large vessels that have become standard in global shipping. Inland port facilities at Greer and Dillon connect rail and truck freight to the coast. The state's manufacturing base continues to attract investment, driven partly by its position as the only state in the Southeast with both a major automotive cluster and a deep-water Atlantic port. Virginia's defining megaproject is underwater. The Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, connecting Hampton and Norfolk across the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay, has been one of the most congested choke points in the entire Southeast for decades. A single crossing serving both directions of Interstate 64 through two-lane tunnels. It routinely backs up for miles during summer weekends when beach traffic collides with military and port traffic from the world's largest naval station sitting right next to it. The $3.9 billion expansion has been under construction since 2019, and 2025 was its most dramatic year. A tunnel boring machine named Mary spent 2 years drilling 2 new tunnels beneath the harbor floor, boring through 44.5-foot diameter tubes and assembling 21,000 precast concrete segments as she went. Mary completed her second and final tunnel breakthrough in September 2025, ending the underground portion of construction. The first 2 lanes of the new South Trestle Bridge opened to traffic in October 2025. The project was originally due to finish in 2025, was pushed back 18 months to 2027 due to construction delays, and is now racing toward a September 2026 substantial completion date that would earn the contractor a $90 million early completion bonus. When done, I-64 across Hampton Roads goes from 4 lanes to 8, finally matching the demand that has been overwhelming it for 30 years. Virginia has other major construction underway. The Long Bridge over the Potomac River, carrying Amtrak and Virginia Railway Express trains between Virginia and Washington, D.C., is being expanded from 2 tracks to 4 in a $2 billion project designed to relieve one of the worst rail bottlenecks on the East Coast. The I-495 and I-95 Express Lanes network continues expanding through Northern Virginia, and the state is investing heavily in the rail corridor connecting Richmond to Washington as part of the broader Northeast Corridor improvement effort. There is a tunnel running beneath the city of Baltimore that has been slowing down every train on the East Coast since the Civil War. The Baltimore and Potomac Tunnel was built in 1873, and every Amtrak train traveling the Northeast Corridor between Washington and New York has to pass through it. The problem is that it was designed for 19th century locomotives, which means it curves in ways that force modern trains to slow from 125 miles per hour down to 30. At its worst, it floods. The ceiling drips. The floor has been sinking for decades. Engineers call it the single largest bottleneck on the Northeast Corridor south of New Jersey, a 150-year-old piece of infrastructure quietly holding back one of the most important rail lines in the world. The Frederick Douglass Tunnel Program is the $6 billion answer. Named after the abolitionist who escaped slavery by boarding a train in Baltimore, the project will build 2 brand-new 2-mile tunnel tubes through the city, running parallel to the existing structure while trains keep operating throughout construction. The new tunnel will handle all Amtrak and MARC commuter rail traffic. The old one will carry freight. When trains stop crawling through the curve at 30 miles per hour and start moving at full speed, the travel time between Washington and New York will drop, and the ripple effect on the whole Northeast Corridor will be significant. Construction is now firmly underway. The main contract was awarded to a Kiewit and J.F. Shea joint venture in 2024. Geotechnical investigations wrapped up in early 2026. Soil and underground conditions mapped across the full alignment. Utility relocation is active, a new bridge over West Mulberry Street is under construction, and 47 residential and commercial properties along the corridor have been acquired and demolished. Heavy tunneling is expected to accelerate through 2026 and 2027, with the full program targeting completion before the end of the decade. Beyond the tunnel, Maryland is investing heavily in its port infrastructure, transit systems, and the broader Northeast Corridor upgrades that connect it to the Washington-Baltimore metro area. But the Frederick Douglass Tunnel is the project that will matter most, quietly eliminating a constraint that has been costing millions of people hours of their lives for a century and a half. Nashville is one of the fastest-growing cities in America. It has been attracting people, businesses, and investment at a pace that has transformed it from a regional music capital into a full-scale economic powerhouse over the last 2 decades. The skyline has changed dramatically. The population has grown by hundreds of thousands, and the old Nissan Stadium, sitting on the east bank of the Cumberland River, has become a symbol of the city that Tennessee is trying to leave behind. The stadium opened in 1999. A study found that maintaining it through the end of its lease in 2039 would cost between $1.75 and $1.95 billion. Building a new one made more financial sense than patching the old one indefinitely, so in 2023, construction began on a replacement directly next to the existing facility. The new Nissan Stadium is a $2.1 billion enclosed venue with a translucent ETFE roof, 60,000 seats, 130 suites, and the kind of infrastructure that can host Super Bowls, college football playoffs, and major concerts. Turner Construction and Ecom Hunt are leading the build. The structure topped out in November 2025 when the final steel beam was placed. Glass curtain wall installation began in September 2025. The roof installation is following close behind. Target completion is February 2027, ahead of the first football season. The project hasn't been without trouble. In mid-2025, a noose was discovered on the construction site, a deeply troubling incident that halted work while the Tennessee Builders Alliance suspended operations, conducted anti-bias training, and launched an investigation. Cost overruns exceeding $135 million have also emerged, with the Titans responsible for any amount above the original budget. Still, it is tracking toward its 2027 opening. The stadium is also the anchor of a larger transformation. The east bank of the Cumberland, historically an industrial and underutilized area across the river from downtown, is being redeveloped around the new stadium with mixed-use neighborhoods, parks, and infrastructure. Tennessee also has serious nuclear ambitions, with the Hermes research reactor being developed at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, part of a broader push to position the state at the forefront of next-generation nuclear technology. The Brent Spence Bridge carries Interstate 75 and Interstate 71 simultaneously across the Ohio River between Covington, Kentucky, and Cincinnati, Ohio. When it was designed in the 1960s, it was built for 80,000 vehicles a day. Right now, it handles around 160,000. It is functionally obsolete, perpetually congested, and sits at the intersection of 2 of the most important freight corridors in the country. I-75 runs from Michigan to Florida. The corridor through Cincinnati and Covington moves billions of dollars of goods every year, and every truck doing it has been squeezing across a bridge that was never designed for this volume. People have been talking about fixing this for decades. Every few years, a plan emerged, an announcement was made, and then nothing happened. The cost estimates kept rising as the years passed, going from $2.8 billion in 2022 to $3.6 billion, and finally landing at $4.05 billion in construction costs alone. The politics between 2 states and the federal government kept stalling it. The bridge became something of a running joke in infrastructure circles, the project that everyone agreed was critical and nobody could actually start. Construction is starting now. Ohio and Kentucky signed off on the final contractor agreement with the Walsh-Kokosing joint venture in early 2026, with groundbreaking set for spring. The plan is a new double-decker cable-stay companion bridge immediately west of the existing crossing, carrying all interstate and freight traffic. The existing Brent Spence Bridge gets rehabilitated and restriped for local traffic only, which is actually what it was originally designed to do. 8 miles of approach roads in both states get rebuilt alongside it. The companion bridge is expected to be complete by 2031, with full approach work finishing by 2033. After decades of waiting, the most important freight crossing in the Midwest is finally moving. Alabama is not the first state that comes to mind when you think about cutting-edge manufacturing, but in 2022, Novelis broke ground on a $2.5 billion aluminum recycling and rolling plant in Bay Minette that will be the most advanced facility of its kind in the world and the first fully integrated aluminum mill built anywhere in the United States in nearly 40 years. Aluminum rolling mills take raw aluminium and process it into flat rolled sheet used in everything from beverage cans to car body panels. Most of that sheet metal for North America has been imported or produced at aging facilities that can't meet modern efficiency or sustainability standards. Novelis, the world's largest aluminium recycler, chose Bay Minette because of the available industrial land, the proximity to automotive manufacturing customers across the South, and the strong state incentives Alabama put together to land the investment. The plant will recycle 15 billion beverage cans per year when fully operational, producing 600,000 tons of finished aluminium goods annually. Ball Corporation already has an anchor contract for beverage can sheet locked in. Construction was originally expected to finish in mid-2025. Heavy equipment, including the massive hot mill housings, arrived on site through 2025, and around 1,000 contractors were working simultaneously during the peak phase. The revised operational target is the second half of 2026. The workforce will grow to 1,000 permanent employees once production begins, in a county where that kind of sustained manufacturing employment changes the local economy in ways that a data center or warehouse simply doesn't. Alabama's broader manufacturing story has been building for years. Mercedes-Benz has been making vehicles in Vance since 1997. Honda builds in Lincoln. Hyundai has a major plant in Montgomery. The state has quietly assembled one of the most significant automotive manufacturing bases in the South, and the Novelis plant is the latest addition to an industrial footprint that keeps growing. 2 years ago, Mississippi's biggest economic development story was landing a $10 billion Amazon data center commitment in Madison County, the single largest capital investment in the state's history. It was a genuinely transformative announcement for a state that has long struggled with economic development, and construction on the Madison County campus began quickly, with over 75 Mississippi companies immediately engaged in the build. Then Amazon came back. In November 2025, it announced a $3 billion second campus in Warren County near Vicksburg. In April 2026, it announced $12 billion more split across a massive Madison County expansion and a conversion of a former Delphi manufacturing plant in Hinds County into a data center. The total Amazon commitment to Mississippi now stands at $25 billion across 4 campuses and 8 confirmed projects, with 2,000 high-skilled jobs promised and thousands more in construction and supply chain support. Compass Data Centers added another $10 billion commitment in Lauderdale County in January 2025. In the span of roughly 2 years, Mississippi went from hoping to attract technology investment to having more data center construction underway per capita than almost any state in the country. The reasons are straightforward. Mississippi has cheap land, available power through Entergy, a tax and incentive structure specifically designed for large capital projects, and a governor's office that moved fast to close deals. Amazon worked with Entergy on a grid modernization program that will improve reliability for the entire state as a byproduct of powering the data centers. The construction activity has been so large that it has already reshaped local labor markets in Madison County, with thousands of electricians, contractors, and engineers flowing in from across the region. Mississippi is still one of the poorest states in the country. The data center boom doesn't change that overnight, but $25 billion in committed investment, arriving in a state that has spent decades being overlooked, is not a small thing. Arkansas doesn't often make headlines for megaprojects, and for most of its history, that was an accurate reflection of reality. The state has a population of about 3 million people, a largely rural geography, and an economy built around agriculture, retail, and logistics. But in the last few years, Arkansas has been building with unusual ambition, and the story starts in the middle of Little Rock, where Interstate 30 cuts through the heart of the city. For decades, the I-30 bridge over the Arkansas River was a bottleneck that Arkansans simply learned to live with. A 6-lane crossing carrying over 100,000 vehicles daily through downtown Little Rock and North Little Rock. It was the kind of infrastructure that looked fine until you examined it closely, at which point it became clear it was neither safe nor adequate for a city that had grown significantly since the bridge was built. The 30 Crossing project was Arkansas's answer, a $634 million reconstruction of the 4.7-mile corridor from the I-630 interchange in Little Rock to the I-40 interchange in North Little Rock, including a brand new 10-lane bridge over the river. It was the most expensive project the Arkansas Department of Transportation had ever undertaken, completed in late 2024, about 6 months ahead of schedule. The project landed right in the middle of a politically charged conversation about what cities should do with their downtown highways. Critics argued that Arkansas was doubling down on car-centric infrastructure at a time when cities across the country were removing downtown freeways to reconnect neighborhoods. Little Rock Mayor Frank Scott Jr. acknowledged the history directly at the completion ceremony, noting that I-630 had effectively redlined the city, cementing racial and economic divides for decades. Whether more highway capacity solves that or deepens it is a debate that will unfold over the next generation. What is happening next in Arkansas is less controversial and more straightforwardly interesting. Amazon broke ground in July 2025 on a 930,000 square foot logistics facility at the Port of Little Rock, a multimodal hub with access to river, rail, road, and runway that Amazon has been eyeing for years. The facility is expected to be operational by 2027, employing over 1,000 people as part of what Amazon describes as a $2.6 billion investment across Arkansas. A neighboring super site is already being planned across the street. Then there is the Southwest Arkansas Megasite in Clark County, a 991-acre industrial site near Arkadelphia that the state and county have been preparing since July 2025 as a certified shovel-ready location for major manufacturing investment. It is not a project in the traditional sense. It is infrastructure built in anticipation of a project, a signal to the world that Arkansas is ready to compete for the kind of large-scale industrial investment that has been transforming states like Tennessee, Alabama, and Georgia over the past decade. Whether it lands a major tenant in the near term or sits ready for years before the right company arrives, the fact that rural Arkansas is building industrial infrastructure at this scale says something about how seriously the state is now playing the economic development game. Louisiana has been an energy state for over a century. The first offshore oil well in American waters was drilled off the Louisiana coast in 1947. The state has been living with and from the consequences of that industry ever since. The economic booms, the environmental damage, the culture built around extraction that has defined whole communities across the Gulf Coast for generations. Now it is building the largest LNG export terminal in American history, and the story of how it got there is a decade of failed starts, corporate collapses, and eventually an Australian mining giant stepping in to rescue a project that Louisiana had been promised and then had taken away multiple times. The terminal, now called Louisiana LNG, sits in Calcasieu Parish near Lake Charles. It was originally conceived as driftwood LNG by a company called Tellurian, which spent years pitching it to investors and governments without ever quite securing the financing to make it real. The project changed hands, timelines slipped, costs ballooned, and Lake Charles watched as neighboring states collected LNG investment while theirs remained stuck on paper. Then, in late 2024, Woodside Energy, Australia's biggest oil and gas producer, acquired Tellurian, and with it, the entire Driftwood project for roughly $900 million. Within months, Woodside had restructured the financing, brought in the private equity firm Stonepeak as a 40% partner for $5.7 billion, signed Bechtel as the EPC contractor, and in April 2025 made the final investment decision to move forward. Groundbreaking happened in September 2025. Construction is now active across the site. By the end of 2025, the first of 3 liquefaction trains was 28% complete and tracking slightly ahead of schedule. The full first phase, 3 trains with 16.5 million tons per year of capacity, carries a total capital cost of $17.5 billion, ranking it among the largest foreign direct investments in Louisiana's history. At peak construction, around 15,000 jobs will be supported. First LNG production is targeted for 2029. The project has environmental critics who point out that Louisiana LNG's projected emissions will exceed every other LNG export terminal in the country, and several planned ones too. Woodside promotes natural gas as a transition fuel away from coal, a claim that has been made about every LNG project ever built and is contested in equal measure. What is not contested is the scale of the investment, or what it means to a region that spent years watching a promised project evaporate over and over before finally watching it actually happen. Louisiana also has the Meta-Hyperion data center in Richland Parish, a $7.5 billion facility spanning over 1.4 million square feet, one of the largest tech infrastructure investments in the state's history. In a state that has long depended on one industry to carry its economy, the combination of energy and data infrastructure arriving simultaneously represents a genuine diversification that previous Louisiana governors could only have wished for. West Virginia's economy was built on coal. For most of the 20th century, that was enough, and for communities across the state's mountains and valleys, the mines provided everything: jobs, identity, political power, and a sense of what the state was for. Then the coal market shifted, mines closed, and West Virginia was left with some of the highest unemployment rates in the country, some of the worst infrastructure in the region, and a political conversation that had become almost entirely about what had been lost rather than what might come next. The Appalachian Regional Clean Hydrogen Hub, known as ARCH-2, is the most significant attempt in a generation to write a different story for the state. When the Biden administration announced it in October 2023, it came with up to $925 million in federal funding and projections of more than 20,000 jobs. The concept is straightforward. West Virginia sits on top of enormous natural gas reserves and has the underground geology to store captured carbon. ARCH2 would use that natural gas to produce hydrogen, capture the carbon emissions underground, and feed the resulting clean hydrogen into industrial and transportation applications across the broader Appalachian region, including southeast Ohio and western Pennsylvania. The project is not a single facility. It is a network of linked production nodes, pipelines, and end-use applications spread across hundreds of miles of mountain terrain, which is both what makes it economically interesting and what makes it genuinely hard to build. An environmental impact statement process began in December 2024, the kind of regulatory review that typically takes years. Residents near proposed project sites in Mason County have been raising questions about siting, land use, and what the construction would mean for their communities. Questions that the project consortium has been slow to answer in ways that satisfy the people most directly affected. The Trump administration's shift away from clean energy investment has created uncertainty about whether the full federal funding commitment holds, and some of the project's original partners have quietly stepped back from specific components. What remains is a framework, a federal commitment, a geographic logic, and the kind of project that West Virginia has not seen in decades. Whether ARCH-2 reaches its full potential or ends up as another promise that fell short will say a great deal about whether the state can actually make the transition from what it was to what it needs to become. Oklahoma City has a habit of surprising people. A city that most of the country associates with oil, the land run, and the 1995 bombing has spent the last 2 decades quietly transforming itself into one of the more ambitious small cities in America. A series of voter-approved sales tax programs called MAPs, Metropolitan Area Projects, have funded a new arena, a new convention center, streetcar infrastructure, parks, and a river development that have collectively changed what downtown Oklahoma City feels and looks like. The city has essentially been renovating itself with its own money for 30 years, one project at a time, and the results are visible. The next thing Oklahoma City wants to build is something no one would have predicted: a 1,907-foot skyscraper called the Legends Tower, named for the year Oklahoma became a state, that if completed would be the tallest building in the United States, surpassing One World Trade Center in New York by 130 feet. It would rank 5th in the world. The developer is Madison Capital, a California firm, and the project sits in the Bricktown Entertainment District as the centerpiece of a larger development called the Boardwalk at Bricktown, which includes 3 additional towers at 345 feet each, 1,776 apartments, a Hyatt hotel, and over 110,000 square feet of retail and restaurants. The project has been approved by the Oklahoma City Council, which voted 8-1 to grant it unlimited height in June 2024. It has been declared fully funded at $700 million for the overall development. It has also been delayed. Construction was supposed to start in fall 2024, then in early 2025. As of mid-2025, the FAA was still reviewing the tower's impact on flight paths for nearby airports, and the developer was in discussions about whether the height would need to be modified. The 3 smaller towers were supposed to begin construction later in 2025 as a first phase. This is the tension at the heart of Legends Tower. The ambition is genuine and the funding appears to exist, but the project sits in a city that has never built anything remotely close to this height, in a state with a limited pool of the kind of high-end residential and commercial tenants. A tower like this requires to pencil out financially, and next to an airport that the FAA takes seriously. The history of super tall projects in smaller American cities is not encouraging. Several have been announced, funded on paper, and eventually quietly reduced in scope or abandoned altogether. Oklahoma City has beaten the odds before. The MAPS program succeeded when nobody thought a Rust Belt oil city could vote to tax itself into a renaissance. Legends Tower could be the next chapter. It could also be another delayed promise in a long list of them. Right now, it is somewhere in between. Approved, funded, partially delayed, and still officially planned to become the tallest thing Americans have ever built. The South is transforming faster than almost anywhere else in America. But cross north into the middle of the country, and you find something different. Not glamour, not record-breaking skyscrapers, just the essential work that keeps the whole nation running. Chicago has always built in a way that makes other cities feel self-conscious. The home of the skyscraper, the city that invented the elevator, that built the L in 1892 and never stopped adding to it. Even when the rest of the country retreats from ambition, Chicago keeps going, and right now it is going harder than it has in decades. O'Hare International Airport is in the middle of its most significant expansion since it was built. The O'Hare 21 program, launched in 2018, is a comprehensive rebuild of one of the busiest airports on Earth. The first phase, a $1.3 billion expansion and renovation of Terminal 5, was completed in 2023, adding 10 new wide-body gates, expanding the terminal by 350,000 square feet and increasing capacity by 25%. Now, the second phase is moving. A $1.3 billion new Concourse D broke ground in August 2025, a satellite structure with 19 new gates designed to handle both domestic and international flights. Terminal 3 is receiving a $300 million upgrade for the first time since the 1980s. A new global terminal designed by Studio Gang will replace Terminal 2 and become the centerpiece of a transformed airport campus, currently targeting completion in 2032. By the time O'Hare 21 finishes in the mid-2030s, the airport will have gained roughly 25% more gate capacity and be fundamentally different from the airport that frustrated millions of travelers for decades. Then there is the stadium fight. The Chicago Bears have been playing at Soldier Field since 1971, and the building they inherited, rebuilt in 2003 at enormous expense, is considered by many in the NFL to be the worst venue in professional football. For years, the team was eyeing a move to the suburbs, purchasing land in Arlington Heights with plans for a private stadium campus. Then, they turned back to the city. In April 2024, they unveiled plans for a $4.7 billion domed lakefront stadium next to Soldier Field, one of the most ambitious sports venue proposals in American history. The Bears would put in $2.3 billion. They wanted $2.3 billion in public financing, primarily through the Illinois Sports Facilities Authority. The Illinois governor called the ask a non-starter. The city endorsed it. The state legislature stalled. Meanwhile, Indiana began making noise about whether the team might consider crossing the state line, and by late 2025, the Bears were at least taking that conversation seriously. As of now, the stadium has no funding agreement, no construction date, and no clear resolution to the political standoff. What Chicago does have is a team that wants to stay, a city that wants to host a Super Bowl, and a political fight that has become a test of whether Illinois can actually close the deals its ambitions require. The CREATE program, a $5 billion freight rail modernization project that untangles the most complex railroad junction in North America in the heart of Chicago, is also underway in the background. Less glamorous than a stadium or a new terminal, but arguably more important to the region's long-term economic health. Indiana sits at the geographic center of the American industrial heartland. Detroit is an hour north. Chicago is an hour west. Columbus and Cincinnati are to the east. The state has spent decades as essential infrastructure for a manufacturing economy, an unremarkable but indispensable node in the supply chains that kept the Midwest running. What is happening in Indiana right now is a different order of magnitude entirely. Amazon Web Services already had an $11 billion data center campus under construction in New Carlisle, a project called Project Rainier that hosts some of the most powerful AI computing infrastructure on the planet, including the systems that train AI models for Anthropic. In November 2025, Amazon announced it was building again, another $15 billion, another campus in northern Indiana, adding 2.4 gigawatts of data center capacity to a region that is rapidly becoming one of the most significant AI infrastructure hubs in the world. Total Amazon investment in Indiana now stands at over $26 billion. When construction begins on the new campuses in 2026, Indiana will host more active data center construction simultaneously than almost any other state in the country. The story is not entirely straightforward. The New Carlisle campus faced a temporary halt order from the Indiana Department of Environmental Management in 2025 over unauthorized impacts to wetlands, and Amazon is working through revised mitigation applications with regulators. The new $15 billion investment does not yet have confirmed site locations, though the city of Hobart in Lake County confirmed an agreement within 24 hours of the announcement, suggesting the geography is taking shape quickly. There are also questions about power. Indiana's grid was not designed for this level of demand, and Amazon negotiated a special agreement with utility provider NIPSCO that protects existing customers from cost increases as new energy infrastructure is built to serve the campuses. Duke Energy announced a $3.3 billion conversion of its Cayuga station to natural gas as part of the state's broader effort to expand power supply. Indiana has also been watching the Chicago Bears situation closely. The Illinois legislature's reluctance to fund a new stadium prompted Indiana to pass a bill creating a commission to attract professional sports teams to the northwest corner of the state, which sits within the Chicago metro area. Whether the Bears actually leave Illinois is still uncertain, but if they go anywhere, Indiana has positioned itself as the alternative. Ohio has been trying to rebuild its industrial identity for 30 years. The steel mills and auto plants that defined the state through the 20th century shed jobs steadily as manufacturing globalized, and whole communities in the Mahoning Valley, in Youngstown, in Cleveland, watched that identity erode without a clear replacement. The state has tried technology corridors, healthcare campuses, and logistics hubs with mixed results. What arrived in January 2022 changed the conversation entirely. Intel announced it was building 2 semiconductor fabrication plants on a 1,000-acre site in New Albany, east of Columbus, in the single largest private sector investment in Ohio history. The original figure was $20 billion. By March 2024, Intel had increased the commitment to $28 billion. The project was named Ohio 1, sitting at the heart of what the state began calling the Silicon Heartland. President Biden flew in for the groundbreaking. 7,000 construction workers would build it. 3,000 people would work there permanently. Ohio would become a hub for the chips that power AI, smartphones, and defense systems. Then Intel hit turbulence. The company's financial performance deteriorated through 2024 and 2025. Its market share in advanced chips eroded by TSMC and others, and its new CEO inherited a business under serious pressure. In July 2025, Intel announced it was slowing construction at Ohio 1 to align with customer demand. The cranes kept moving, but at a reduced pace. Between $7 and $8 billion had already been invested in the ground by that point. Ohio officials moved quickly to reassure the public that Intel had reaffirmed its commitment, and the company's leadership did so repeatedly through 2025, including at Intel's own Foundry Direct Connect conference in May. The revised completion timeline is now 2030, compared to an original target of 2025. The slowdown is real, but the project is not dead. Intel announced a collaboration with NVIDIA in September 2025 to jointly develop AI infrastructure products, a deal that would require significant foundry capacity. Ohio's education system mobilized around the project with unusual speed, embedding semiconductor training programs into community college curricula across the state. The roads around New Albany have been widened, utilities upgraded, and an entire ecosystem of suppliers has planted itself nearby in anticipation of a campus that will eventually operate regardless of how long the construction takes to finish. Ohio is also watching its broader manufacturing resurgence carefully. Honda and its Korean battery partner LG Energy Solution are building a joint EV battery plant in Fayette County. Lordstown Motors went bankrupt, but Foxconn has been operating the old GM facility. The state's position at the intersection of automotive supply chains, research universities, and now semiconductor manufacturing is more interesting than it has been in a generation. Everything that connects the American Midwest to Canada passes through Detroit. More than a quarter of all land-based trade between the two countries moves through the Detroit-Windsor corridor, making it the busiest international land border crossing in North America. For decades, the sole crossing that handled the majority of that traffic was the Ambassador Bridge, a privately owned structure built in 1929 and controlled by one family, the Maurices, who for years fought aggressively against any attempt to build competition. The political battle over a second crossing stretched across 3 decades, involved the governments of Michigan, Ontario, Canada, and the United States, and produced enough lawsuits, referendums, and blocked legislation to fill a book. Construction on the Gordie Howe International Bridge finally began in 2018. It took 6 years. In June 2024, a Canadian and an American steelworker shook hands in the middle of the Detroit River as the two sides of the bridge deck were permanently connected. By fall 2025, about 95% of construction was complete. The final cranes were being dismantled and lighting tests were underway. A cable-stayed bridge with towers rising 720 feet above the river, 1.5 miles long, connecting I-75 in Detroit directly to Highway 401 in Windsor, the first purpose-built crossing in the corridor in nearly a century. The cost grew to $6.4 billion Canadian dollars as COVID complications and design changes accumulated over the build. The bridge was expected to open in fall 2025, then October, then early 2026. As of now, it has completed major construction and is in final systems testing. When it opens, it will carry 6 lanes, handle 60% of the traffic currently going through the Ambassador Bridge, and end the private monopoly that has defined this crossing for nearly 100 years. Detroit itself is in the middle of a quieter but significant construction cycle. The Hudson Site redevelopment downtown, a long-dormant lot that held the former J.L. Hudson department store building, is finally becoming a mixed-use skyscraper after years of delays. Ford has invested heavily in Corktown, restoring the historic Michigan Central Station as a mobility innovation campus. The city's recovery from its 2013 bankruptcy has been gradual, but the construction activity now visible across downtown Detroit is genuine, not cosmetic. Minnesota built its reputation on doing things carefully and then complaining about how long everything takes. The state has some of the best educated workers in the country, consistently strong public institutions, and a civic culture that takes infrastructure seriously. It also has a light rail project that has become something of a cautionary tale about what happens when all of those qualities collide with the specific complications of tunneling through dense urban neighborhoods. The Metro Green Line extension, commonly known as Southwest Light Rail Transit, or SWLRT, has been in planning or construction since the 1980s first entered the conversation, and formally since the early 2000s. It is a 14.5-mile extension of the existing Green Line, running from downtown Minneapolis through St. Louis Park, Hopkins, Minnetonka, and out to Eden Prairie. 16 stations, 29 new bridges, 2 tunnels, 5 miles of freight rail relocation. When it opens, the commute from Eden Prairie to Target Field in downtown Minneapolis will take 32 minutes. The original budget was around $2 billion. Construction began in earnest after 2018. By 2025, the project had consumed roughly $2.7 billion and needed an additional $650 to $750 million to finish, a funding gap that sent the Metropolitan Council back to the state legislature with its handout at one of the more politically uncomfortable moments possible. As of mid-2025, the project was over 85% complete. Light rail vehicles began testing on the St. Louis Park to Eden Prairie segment in October 2025. Testing on the Minneapolis segment follows in 2026. Passenger service is now projected for 2027, which will be roughly 5 years later than the original target. Minnesota's infrastructure story is not only about the light rail overrun. The state is also in the middle of a significant highway expansion program, continued investment in the Twin Cities metro area's transit network, and a broader effort to move its energy grid toward renewables that involves wind energy projects across the southwestern part of the state. The Line 3 oil pipeline replacement, completed in 2021 after years of protests and legal battles, remains politically contested even now, with environmental and indigenous groups continuing to challenge its operating permits in courts. The construction is done, but the debate is not. Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Minnesota, 5 of the most economically critical states in the country, all building simultaneously. But the Midwest is bigger than the Great Lakes, and the states further west have their own stories. Milwaukee is a city that has been debating what to do with its downtown highway for decades. Interstate 94 cuts through the heart of the city between 16th Street and 71st Street, a 3.5-mile stretch that carries between 158,000 and 178,000 vehicles a day on infrastructure built in the 1960s for a fundamentally different city. The road is deteriorating, the interchanges are outdated, the crash rates are high, and the stadium interchange near American Family Field has become a particular snarl that bottlenecks traffic for miles in either direction during events. The I-94 East-West project is the Wisconsin Department of Transportation's $1.74 billion answer to all of that, and it is now finally underway after years of planning, public meetings, community debates, and legal challenges. Critics argued for years that expanding a downtown highway was the wrong approach, that the money would better serve Milwaukee by investing in transit, and that adding lanes would simply induce more traffic. Supporters countered that the region's economy depends on the corridor functioning, and that the existing road was simply too dangerous and too congested to leave alone. WisDOT won that argument with the federal approval in hand. Construction on the west leg segment, covering I-94 from 71st Street to Zablocki Drive, began in fall 2025. About 150,000 vehicles a day are now navigating long-term lane closures, while crews expand the highway from 3 lanes to 4 in each direction and rebuild the Hawley Road interchange. That segment runs through summer 2028. Construction on the east leg follows in 2028 and wraps by 2030. The stadium interchange itself, the most complex piece, converts to a diverging diamond structure between 2029 and 2033. The full project, all 7 years of it, completes in 2033. A coalition called Fix It 6 has been fighting the project in federal court, arguing that the expansion violates civil rights and environmental laws. In August 2024, they filed suit against the state and federal government. Construction is proceeding regardless, but the legal challenge has not been resolved. Wisconsin has committed to building this road. The question of whether that was the right decision will be answered over the next 30 years by what happens to the neighborhoods on either side of it. Iowa is the windiest state in the country that most people forget to mention when talking about wind energy, which is an oversight because Iowa has been quietly building one of the most remarkable clean energy transformations in American history. More than 60% of the state's electricity now comes from wind, the highest share of any state in the country. On the best days, that number hits 100%. Meaning the wind turbines spread across the flat middle of Iowa are producing more electricity than the entire state is consuming at that moment. Mid-American Energy, which serves about 2/3 of Iowa's electric customers, completed its Wind Prime project in 2024, a $3.9 billion addition of over 2,000 megawatts of wind generation that pushed the utility past the point where it can generate renewable energy equivalent to everything its Iowa customers use in a year. It is now adding solar to the mix. In September 2025, the Iowa Utilities Commission approved an 800-megawatt solar project spanning 6 sites across the state, the largest solar approval in Iowa history, expected to begin construction in 2026 and come online in 2027 and 2028. Mid-American is also proposing 2 new natural gas combustion turbines in Adair County to provide reliable backup capacity during periods when wind and solar output drops. Iowa's energy story is genuinely extraordinary for a largely rural agricultural state that has no particular geographic advantage beyond flatness and wind. What it has built is the result of 2 decades of consistent policy choices, utility investment, and a farming community that found a second income stream in leasing land for turbines. The $21 million a year in landowner lease payments from the Wind Prime project alone went directly into the pockets of Iowa farm families. The transformation from coal state to wind leader didn't happen by accident, and the solar build-out now underway is the next chapter of the same story. Missouri's biggest megaproject story in 2025 is actually about a megaproject that is leaving. The Kansas City Chiefs, who have played at Arrowhead Stadium in Missouri since 1963, announced in December 2025 that they are crossing the state line to Kansas. A $3.3 billion deal with the state of Kansas using Star Bonds financing will fund a new dome stadium in Wyandotte County near the Kansas Speedway, along with a new headquarters and practice facility in Olathe. It is one of the largest public-private sports investments in American history, and it ends over 60 years of the Chiefs as a Missouri institution. The sequence of events that led there is a cautionary tale about what happens when public infrastructure decisions get tangled in state rivalry and tax politics. Jackson County voters rejected a 3/8-cent sales tax in April 2024 that would have funded both Arrowhead Stadium renovations for the Chiefs and a new downtown ballpark for the Royals. Kansas then passed its Star Bonds legislation to lure both teams across the border. Missouri scrambled to respond with its own incentive package. The Chiefs chose Kansas anyway. The Kansas City Royals are still in play. At the end of April 2026, the Royals announced plans for a new downtown stadium and ballpark district near Crown Center in Kansas City, Missouri, with the city committing up to $600 million and the state pledging to cover up to half the project costs. The Royals would stay in Missouri. Whether that deal closes and construction begins before the lease at Kauffman Stadium expires in 2031 is still being negotiated. Beyond the stadium drama, Missouri has been investing in highway infrastructure, port improvements along the Mississippi, and continued development along the Kansas City and St. Louis corridors. The state is not building anything as dramatic as Ohio's semiconductor campus or Indiana's data centers, but its position as the geographic crossroads of the American highway system means its infrastructure investment quietly underpins supply chains across the entire middle of the country. Kansas has been trying to diversify its economy away from agriculture and oil for decades, and in July 2025, it opened the most compelling evidence yet that the effort is working. The Panasonic EV battery plant in DeSoto, a $4 billion facility on 300 acres of former military land, about 25 miles southwest of Kansas City, became the largest electric vehicle battery manufacturing plant in the United States on its grand opening day. The plant makes 2,170 cylindrical lithium-ion batteries, the same format used in Tesla vehicles and other EVs, at a planned annual capacity of 32 gigawatt-hours. Panasonic broke ground in late 2022, and the construction pace that followed was extraordinary for a project of this scale. 2 wings of the 4.7 million square foot building were built simultaneously, the north wing reaching production-ready status in early 2025, while the south wing was still rising around it. At peak construction, 800 tradespeople were on site daily. The plant went through hiring and training simultaneously with its final construction phases, and by opening day, around 1,000 workers were employed. That number is expected to grow to 4,000 as production scales up. Kansas gave the project significant incentives, including a state grant and local tax arrangements. But the economic math was straightforward. This is the largest private investment in Kansas history. It generates an estimated $2.5 billion in annual economic activity. The Brookings, Kansas City Metro, and surrounding communities will see its effects for decades. Governor Laura Kelly, who pushed hard to land the project against competition from other states, called it a once-in-a-generation investment, and on the scale of what Kansas has been able to attract, that is not an overstatement. Then, in December 2025, Kansas landed something even bigger. The Kansas City Chiefs are building their new domed stadium in Wyandotte County. The two deals together, a cutting-edge manufacturing plant and a Super Bowl-capable stadium, represent a genuine shift in what kind of state Kansas is capable of becoming. Nebraska is not a state that tends to make national headlines for construction projects. Its population is under 2 million people. Its economy is built on agriculture and insurance, and its largest city, Omaha, is the kind of place that outsiders underestimate and residents love fiercely. But something significant is being built in Midtown Omaha right now, and it is unlike anything the state has attempted before. Project Health is a $2.19 billion expansion of the University of Nebraska Medical Center campus that will become Nebraska's largest teaching, clinical research, and hospital facility. The scope is enormous, a new complex spanning more than 1 million square feet on a cleared 7.5-acre site formerly occupied by the Monroe Meyer Institute, designed to house the primary inpatient hospital for Nebraska medicine with over 550 beds, along with training facilities for physicians, nurses, pharmacists, and allied health students all under one roof. UNMC's regents approved the initial design phase in April 2025, allowing site preparation and foundational work to begin. The second design phase, authorizing construction of the shell and core at a cost of $1.22 billion, was approved in October 2025. The project is part of a larger vision called Project Next, which includes federal partnerships with the Departments of Defense, Health and Human Services, and Homeland Security to expand national disaster medical response capacity. The idea is that Omaha, which successfully treated Ebola patients in 2014 when few other U.S. hospitals could, should be permanently positioned as a national center for responding to biological emergencies, pandemics, and mass casualty events. Project Health is the foundation of that. The construction is expected to run through 2033 and generate $3.2 billion in economic impact for Nebraska over that period. Alongside Project Health, Omaha's airport, Eppley Airfield, is pursuing a major terminal expansion to accommodate growth that has consistently outpaced its existing capacity. Nebraska may not be building semiconductor fabs or LNG terminals. The combination of a world-class medical complex and a modernized airport is exactly the kind of investment that keeps a mid-sized city competitive for the next generation. The Red River floods. This is not a recent development. The Red River of the North, which forms the border between North Dakota and Minnesota and flows north toward Canada, has flooded the Red River Valley dozens of times since the late 1800s. 8 of the 10 worst floods in recorded history have happened since 1989. The city of Fargo, sitting on the western bank, has been flooded catastrophically multiple times. Most memorably in 1997, when the river rose nearly 40 feet above flood stage, and the entire city came within inches of a disaster that would have dwarfed anything in its history. The Fargo-Moorhead Area Diversion Project is the permanent solution, and at $3.2 billion, it is one of the largest flood control infrastructure projects ever undertaken in the United States. A 30-mile diversion channel that routes Red River floodwaters around the Fargo-Moorhead metro area, a 20-mile earthen embankment called the Southern Embankment, 3 gated control structures, 2 aqueducts that allow existing waterways to cross under the diversion channel, 19 new bridges. It will protect more than 273,000 people and billions of dollars in infrastructure when it is operational in 2027. Getting here took nearly as long as the floods themselves. Minnesota initially denied permits for the project in 2016, forcing a complete redesign. Legal battles, regulatory reviews, and cross-border negotiations between 2 state governments and the federal government stretched for years before the project finally secured its financing in the early 2020s and construction began in earnest. A public-private partnership structure brought in the Red River Valley Alliance Consortium to deliver major components, with the authority making milestone payments only when work is certified complete. A structure designed to protect North Dakota taxpayers from bearing the construction risk up front. By early 2026, the project was in its final year of major construction. All 19 bridges were on track to be open by spring. The diversion channel was 80% excavated. The aqueducts were nearing completion. The Diversion Authority approved a $1 billion construction budget for 2026, the single biggest spending year of the project. When it is done, Fargo will no longer have to watch the Red River and wonder. South Dakota has about 900,000 people, fewer than most mid-sized American cities, and an economy built around agriculture, tourism, and a surprisingly large financial services sector that was attracted decades ago by favorable trust and banking laws. It is not the kind of state where billion-dollar manufacturing projects typically land. And yet, sitting in Brookings, a college town of about 25,000 people in the eastern part of the state, is 3M's largest healthcare manufacturing facility in the world. The plant has been there since 1971, making medical and surgical products, sterilized dressings, surgical tape, cold and hot packs, and biological indicators used in hospitals across America and around the world. Over 54 years, it has grown from a single building to a 667,000 square foot campus employing over 1,000 people. For a town the size of Brookings, this one employer is an economic anchor of extraordinary importance. In July 2023, 3M announced it was expanding again, this time by up to $468 million in 3 phases over 3 years. The first phase broke ground in October 2023 and added 200,000 square feet of manufacturing space, 16 new shipping docks, a warehouse with 8,000 storage slots, and additional lab and office space. That phase was expected to complete in 2025. The subsequent phases, if fully executed, push total investment to $468 million and add 65 net new jobs at a facility that was already the community's largest employer after South Dakota State University. The project is not glamorous by national standards. There are no ribbon-cutting ceremonies with the president, no drone footage of a campus the size of a small city. But for South Dakota, a $468 million manufacturing expansion at its largest private employer in a town of 25,000 is genuinely significant. 3M chose Brookings over multiple international alternatives because of the existing workforce, the state's business climate, and a set of incentives put together by the Governor's Office of Economic Development and the city. The plant will keep making products that go into hospital operating rooms across the country for decades more. The Midwest doesn't build for headlines. It builds because things need to work. Let's now head back east to states where American infrastructure has the longest history and some of its most interesting unfinished business. Pennsylvania is a state with an infrastructure problem so old it has become part of the landscape. Over 3,500 structurally deficient bridges, a highway system built for a mid-20th century economy that now carries freight loads it was never designed for. Decades of deferred maintenance compounded by the slow decline of the industrial base that once funded everything. PennDOT spends billions every year just keeping the existing system from falling further behind. But Pennsylvania is also transforming in ways that go beyond maintenance. The Bellwether District in South Philadelphia is the most dramatic example. The former Philadelphia Energy Solutions refinery, which exploded in 2019 and was subsequently shut down, sat on 1,300 acres of prime industrial land in one of the most economically vulnerable parts of the city. Hillco Redevelopment Partners bought the site, spent years decommissioning 324 tanks, demolishing process units, and cleaning up over a century of petroleum contamination, and is now building one of the largest urban redevelopment projects in American history, a 700-acre industrial campus and a 250-acre innovation campus, together housing up to 10.5 million square feet of logistics, e-commerce, life sciences, and manufacturing space. The second building opened in July 2025. When complete, the project is projected to create 19,000 permanent jobs and 28,000 construction jobs over a decade. For the neighborhoods of South and Southwest Philadelphia that surround it, this is a generational transformation. In Pittsburgh, the Esplanade broke ground in December 2025, a $1.5 billion mixed-use riverfront development on 15 acres of post-industrial land on the north side. PennDOT is simultaneously running over $537 million in road and bridge projects across the Pittsburgh region in 2025 alone. The $5.9 billion Frederick Douglass Tunnel in Baltimore, which is also a Pennsylvania infrastructure story given that the Northeast Corridor runs through the state, is actively under construction and will eventually reduce travel times through Pennsylvania as well. Pennsylvania is also in the middle of a broader conversation about what comes after the industrial economy. Pittsburgh's transformation from Steel City to tech and healthcare hub has been underway for 30 years. Philadelphia's position as a pharmaceutical and life sciences center keeps attracting investment. The Bellwether District is the clearest signal yet that the state is no longer waiting for something to fill the gap left by the industries that left. It is building the answer on the footprint of what came before. Delaware is the smallest state by area after Rhode Island, home to about 1 million people, and famous primarily for being the legal home of more than half the corporations in America. Its actual physical economy is more modest, centered on Wilmington, its largest city, and the port that sits at the confluence of the Christina and Delaware rivers. The Port of Wilmington has been operating on the same footprint since 1923. It is a significant facility, the second busiest seaport on the East Coast by certain measures, but its location at the end of the Christina River limits the size of ships it can handle, and its container capacity has been maxed out for years. Delaware has been trying to fix that for nearly a decade by building a new terminal on the Delaware River at Edgemoor, a former DuPont titanium processing site the state purchased in 2017. What followed is a story that will feel familiar to anyone who has watched infrastructure projects try to navigate the American permitting system. The state cleared the site, demolished the old plant, and spent years working through environmental reviews and federal permits. In October 2024, a federal judge revoked the key Army Corps of Engineers permit, halting the project entirely. The state and its private partner Instructure spent months working through a revised application. Federal permits were reobtained in early 2026, and construction is now projected to begin by June 2026, with the terminal operational by end of 2028. The cost has also grown. Originally announced at $635 million, the latest estimates put Phase 1 at around $670 million, with a $185 million funding gap between what Delaware and Instructure had committed and what the project now costs. Both sides are negotiating how to split the difference. What the terminal will deliver when it opens is a quadrupling of the port's container capacity, the ability to handle the new generation of ultra-large vessels, and an estimated 6,000 new jobs in a state whose economy desperately needs the blue-collar employment that a working port provides. For Delaware, this is the most significant infrastructure investment in a generation. The path to get here has been grinding and expensive, but the project is moving. Every Amtrak train that travels the Northeast Corridor between New York and Boston crosses a bridge over the Connecticut River that was built in 1907. It opens to let boats through, which is routine. What is not routine is how often it fails to close properly, leaving trains halted on both sides and backing up services across the entire corridor for hours at a time. A single aging drawbridge in a quiet stretch of southeastern Connecticut has been costing millions of passengers hours of their lives every year simply by malfunctioning. The replacement is a $1.37 billion project currently under construction between Old Saybrook and Old Lyme. The new bridge is being built about 50 feet south of the existing one, allowing trains to keep running throughout the entire construction period. When it opens around 2030 or 2031, trains will cross at 70 miles per hour instead of the current 45, a 55% increase in speed on one of the busiest rail corridors in the world. The federal government put up $827 million of the cost, making it one of the largest railroad grants ever awarded to a single structure. Construction began in August 2024 with a joint venture of O&G Industries and Tudor Perini as contractors. By mid-2025, the project was on schedule and within budget, drilling foundations on both riverbanks and beginning work on the bridge piers that will support the new structure. Connecticut's broader infrastructure story is the Northeast Corridor passing through it. The state has been investing in the Shoreline East commuter rail expansion, the Hartford line connecting New Haven to Springfield, and a series of upgrades designed to improve the reliability and speed of rail travel across a state whose geography puts most of its population within easy reach of the trains. The river bridge replacement is the most dramatic single project, but the investment pattern running across the state reflects a long-term bet that rail is Connecticut's most important transportation infrastructure and is worth the cost of finally fixing it properly. Boston has a complicated history with large construction projects. The Big Dig, which rerouted the Central Highway underground through the heart of the city, was originally budgeted at $2.6 billion. It ended up costing $24.3 billion, took 16 years to complete, and was followed almost immediately by a ceiling collapse that killed a driver and triggered years of inspections and legal proceedings. Boston lived with construction chaos from 1991 to 2007. The result was genuinely transformative. The Rose Kennedy Greenway now runs through the middle of the city where the elevated highway once stood. The waterfront reconnected to downtown. Traffic flows differently. Whatever the Big Dig was as a financial catastrophe, it did what it set out to do, and Boston is a more livable city because of it. But the project cast such a long shadow over Massachusetts' infrastructure politics that every large project since has had to contend with the memory of what happened last time. The state kept building anyway. South Coast Rail extended commuter service from Boston to Fall River and New Bedford in 2023, connecting two post-industrial cities that had been waiting for rail access since the 1990s. The Allston Multimodal Project is now underway, rebuilding the Massachusetts Turnpike through a section of Boston where the existing infrastructure sits on deteriorating foundations next to Harvard University's expansion plans. The project involves rebuilding I-90, creating new rail connections, and freeing up around 45 acres of land for redevelopment, with construction costs expected in the range of $1 to $2 billion depending on final scope. Massachusetts also has a serious nuclear conversation underway. The Holtec proposal to restart the Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station in Plymouth, shut down in 2019, gained significant momentum through 2025 as the state wrestled with how to meet its clean energy goals without enough wind and solar to close the gap. Nothing is under construction, but the possibility of nuclear power returning to New England is more real than it has been in decades. Given Massachusetts' record of starting projects that end up costing considerably more than planned, the state's political leadership is approaching any new nuclear commitment with understandable caution. Rhode Island is the smallest state in the country, about 1 million people, slightly larger than a big county in Texas, and a coastline that has shaped everything about its economy and identity since the first colonial settlements arrived. It was also the first state in the country to get a working offshore wind farm, 5 turbines off Block Island that came online in 2016, and proved the concept in American waters at a time when the entire offshore wind industry in the U.S. was still largely theoretical. Revolution Wind, the full-scale follow-up to that proof of concept, is a different order of magnitude entirely. 65 turbines in federal waters, 15 miles off the Rhode Island and Connecticut coast, generating 704 megawatts when running at capacity, enough to power roughly 350,000 homes. Ørsted and Eversource started construction in 2023. By August 2025, 45 of the 65 turbines were installed, and the project was 80% complete. Then the Trump administration stopped it. The Bureau of Ocean Energy Management issued a stop work order on August 22, 2025, citing national security concerns that developers and state officials said had already been fully reviewed and cleared by the Department of Defense during the original permitting process. Ørsted and the states of Rhode Island and Connecticut sued the federal government. A federal judge granted a preliminary injunction in September 2025, ruling the stop work order was likely unlawful, and construction resumed. In December 2025, the Interior Department suspended the project again. Another lawsuit, another injunction in January 2026, allowing work to continue. With only 7 turbines remaining to be installed at that point, Revolution Wind came online in March 2026, sending power to the New England grid for the first time. The fight over Revolution Wind became a national story about what happens when a project that has been fully permitted, is nearly finished, and is about to generate clean energy for hundreds of thousands of people gets caught in a political dispute about offshore wind policy. Rhode Island won that fight, barely, and the lights are on. Whether the state's broader offshore wind ambitions survive the current federal environment is a much harder question. Vermont is a small, rural state with a population of about 650,000 people, more cows than residents in certain counties, and an economy built around agriculture, skiing, higher education, and a stubbornly independent character that tends to resist the kind of large-scale industrial development that defines megaprojects elsewhere. The state has no major highways beyond the interstates, no deep-water port, no semiconductor fab on the horizon. What Vermont does have is a flood problem that has become existential. The Great Vermont Flood of 2023 and the severe flooding events of 2024 hit the state in consecutive summers, damaging roads, bridges, culverts, and entire downtown districts across dozens of communities. The capital city of Montpelier was inundated. Towns in the Northeast Kingdom saw damage that will take years to repair. The cumulative infrastructure bill runs toward $1 billion, most of it falling on small municipalities with limited budgets and overtaxed public works departments. The state has been working through a massive flood recovery and infrastructure rebuilding program that represents, in aggregate, Vermont's largest infrastructure investment in years. Dozens of bridge replacements, culvert upgrades, stormwater systems, and road rebuilds are underway or in planning simultaneously across all 14 counties. The federal government has allocated significant disaster recovery funding, and Vermont has been directing a large portion toward buying out flood-prone properties and relocating residents and businesses to higher ground rather than simply rebuilding in place. Nearly $50 million in federal flood recovery grants had been awarded by December 2025, with more rounds of funding to follow. Vermont is also undertaking what the state auditor has called one of the largest infrastructure projects in state history, a $229 million build-out of high-speed fiber broadband to every address in the state. More than 60% of Vermont addresses lack access to broadband meeting modern standards, a problem that became painfully visible during the pandemic when remote work and school exposed how many rural communities were functionally cut off. Federal BEAD program approval in early 2026 unlocked $93 million in the first phase, with 7 providers, including Comcast, Fidium, and local operators, beginning construction across the state. For a small rural state, universal broadband is as transformative as a highway once was. New Hampshire has one highway that matters more than everything else in the state. Interstate 93 runs from the Massachusetts border at Salem North through Manchester and Concord, carrying commuters, tourists, and freight through southern New Hampshire's most densely populated corridor. For decades, it ran 2 lanes in each direction through this stretch, which sounds reasonable until you drive it on a Friday afternoon heading toward the White Mountains and find yourself sitting in traffic that stretches for miles. The I-93 widening project from Salem to Manchester is a $770 million 20-mile reconstruction that has been underway since the late 2000s and represents the most ambitious highway project in New Hampshire history. The work expanded the interstate from 2 lanes to 4 in each direction, rebuilt interchanges, added park and ride facilities, and replaced multiple bridges along the corridor. By 2025, it was approximately complete, with final paving and finishing work wrapping up the years-long construction effort. Now, New Hampshire is planning the next phase. The Bow-Concord section of I-93, running through the capital city, is next in line for expansion, a $370 million project that has been in planning and environmental review for years, with bridge construction expected to begin in 2029 and the full work extending through 2038. Meanwhile, a new Exit 4A on I-93 in the Derry and Londonderry area is under construction at a cost of $76.5 million, with associated road widening expected to run through 2028. New Hampshire also has an active conversation about commuter rail. A study completed in 2025 put the cost of restoring Boston to Manchester rail service at $782 million to build and $17 million a year to operate. The state has never had commuter rail connecting it to Boston, despite being close enough that many residents already make the drive daily. Whether that changes in the coming years depends on political will and federal funding that has become harder to count on. For now, New Hampshire is a highway state, and it is still building its highways. Maine is the most rural state east of the Mississippi, 1.5 million people spread across a landmass the size of the other 5 New England states combined, most of it forest, coastline, and small coastal towns that have been watching their economies evolve for decades as fishing, timber, and manufacturing contracted and tourism, healthcare, and remote work expanded in their place. The Maine Turnpike, which runs from the New Hampshire border at Kittery North to Augusta, is the central artery of all of this, carrying the freight, the tourists, and the commuters that keep the state's economy moving. The Turnpike Authority completed a major widening project through the Portland area in 2023, adding a 3rd lane in each direction between exits 44 and 48, a $146 million project that required rebuilding 4 bridges and reconfiguring 5 interchanges. That work transformed the corridor that runs past the main mall area, which had been one of the most congested stretches of highway in the state. Now the authority is planning the Gorham Connector, a 5-mile spur linking the suburb of Gorham to I-95 at a projected cost of over $240 million. The project has been in planning for decades and is moving toward construction, despite vocal opposition from critics who argue that building new highway infrastructure into growing suburbs will simply generate more traffic rather than reducing congestion, pointing to the well-documented phenomenon of induced demand. The authority is proceeding, drawing on decades of traffic modeling and federal funding secured through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Maine also completed an important missing link in its road network in June 2025 when the I-395 and Maine Highway 9 connector opened north of Brewer after more than 20 years in planning and 8 years of construction. The $107 million 6-mile road had been described as a missing link connecting the interstate system to the Route 9 corridor running east to the Canadian border. For the communities in eastern Maine that depended on Route 9 for access, its connection to the interstate system changes practical travel distances by meaningful amounts, which in a state where some towns are an hour from the nearest city, is not trivial. Maine's story, like Vermont and New Hampshire, is not about billion-dollar megaprojects that grab national headlines. It is about fixing what is broken, connecting what has been disconnected, and building the infrastructure that keeps a rural state from falling further behind the places that get more attention and more investment. The Turnpike widening, the Route 9 connector, the Gorham project, individually modest, collectively the difference between a state that functions and one that doesn't. New England closes the eastern map, and to close it out, we go to the 6 states that don't sit on the Atlantic coast, or the Gulf, or the Great Plains. They sit further out, in the Rockies, in the Pacific Northwest, on the edge of the Arctic, and in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And the last one of them might just be the most fitting place to end this journey. Seattle has been building one of the most ambitious urban transit systems in America. One referendum, one lawsuit, and one cost overrun at a time. In 2016, voters in King, Pierce, and Snohomish counties approved Sound Transit 3, a $54 billion expansion of the Link light rail network that would eventually extend the system to 116 miles and 83 stations by 2044. It was the largest transit ballot measure ever passed by American voters, and it passed with 54% of the vote in a region that had watched years of traffic congestion turn a city surrounded by water and mountains into a commuting nightmare. The message was clear. Seattle was willing to pay for a real solution. What followed has been the complicated reality of actually building it. Sound Transit has been opening new extensions steadily for years. The Federal Way extension opened in 2025, adding 3 new stations and connecting the southern suburbs to Seattle. The 2 line, which crosses Lake Washington to Bellevue and Redmond, completed its eastern extension to downtown Redmond in May 2025, and then its crossing of Lake Washington into Seattle in March 2026 after construction delays on the floating bridge section, the first time in the world that light rail has been run on a floating bridge. 5 new extensions have opened in the past 3 years alone, but the biggest pieces are still ahead. The West Seattle Link Extension, a $6.7 to $7.1 billion project adding 4.1 miles and 4 new stations from SoDo to West Seattle's Alaska Junction neighborhood, received its federal record of decision in April 2025, clearing the final environmental hurdle and moving into the design phase. It is currently targeted to open in 2032. The Ballard Link Extension, another major urban project with a downtown tunnel, targets 2039. The full Sound Transit 3 program, with its 2044 completion horizon, is the long game of transit in the Pacific Northwest. Washington is also home to the Grand Coulee Dam on the Columbia River, completed in 1942 and still the largest hydroelectric facility in the United States, generating enough power for millions of homes across the Pacific Northwest. It requires continuous maintenance and upgrade investment, with the Bureau of Reclamation managing a rolling program of improvements that keeps one of the most significant pieces of infrastructure in the country operational. Grand Coulee is not a new project, but it is perpetually being rebuilt, a monument that never stops needing attention. Idaho is growing faster than almost any state in the country. The Boise metropolitan area has been one of the fastest-growing regions in the U.S. for a decade, driven by technology sector migration from California and a quality of life that attracted remote workers during and after the pandemic. The population of the Treasure Valley has grown by tens of thousands of people annually, and the infrastructure that was built for a much smaller city is being stretched in every direction. Into this context arrived one of the most consequential economic development announcements in Idaho history. In September 2022, Micron Technology, which has been headquartered in Boise since its founding in 1978, announced it was building a brand new semiconductor fabrication facility at its campus on Federal Way. A $15 billion investment, the first new memory fab built in the United States in 20 years, with DRAM production scheduled to begin in 2027. By mid-2025, 11 cranes were visible on the construction site, and 4,000 construction workers were on the job simultaneously, making their own concrete on site, crushing tons of rock, and building a 1.2 million square foot facility that will eventually employ around 2,000 people directly and support an estimated 17,000 jobs total. Then, in June 2025, Micron announced it was building again, a second fab in Boise, adding another $30 billion to the Idaho commitment, bringing total planned investment in the state to over $45 billion. The first fab DRAM output targets 2027. The second fab and additional research and development facilities follow across the rest of the decade. Micron has received up to $6.4 billion in CHIPS Act direct funding to support its Idaho and New York fabs, making it one of the largest beneficiaries of the federal semiconductor reshoring initiative. For a state of less than 2 million people, this scale of investment is genuinely transformative. Boise is building water treatment facilities, power infrastructure, and road improvements to support the campus. Idaho's university system has been scrambling to build semiconductor engineering pipelines fast enough to supply the workforce the fabs will need. What was a tech-friendly mid-sized city a decade ago is becoming a node in the global semiconductor supply chain, not by accident, but because a company that started in Idaho chose to keep betting on where it came from. Montana is a state of vast distances and small populations. About 1 million people spread across a landmass larger than Japan, connected by 2-lane highways that run through mountains, high plains, and some of the most spectacular wilderness in North America. The state's economy runs on agriculture, tourism, energy extraction, and increasingly on clean energy development that takes advantage of what Montana has in abundance: wind. The North Plains Connector is the most significant infrastructure project in Montana in decades, and most people outside the state have never heard of it. A $3.2 billion, 415-mile high-voltage direct current transmission line running from the Colstrip substation in southeastern Montana to Center, North Dakota. It would be the first major new transmission line built in Montana in 30 years. Its purpose is to bridge the eastern and western electricity grids, which currently operate largely as separate systems with limited ability to share power between them. That gap has become economically and operationally significant as renewable energy sources generate power in patterns that don't always match demand, and states in the West increasingly need to draw from the East and vice versa. Developer Grid United filed for permitting in late 2024, with Montana and North Dakota beginning their review of siting and construction. Portland General Electric, which must phase out coal power under Oregon law by 2029, has committed to the project because it gives the utility access to renewable energy from Montana's wind-rich eastern plains when Pacific Northwest generation falls short. Other utilities across the region have been circling the project for the same reasons. Whether it gets built depends on regulatory approvals in 2 states, final financing, and the broader federal regulatory environment for transmission projects, which has been inconsistent. But the need it is designed to meet is real, and the economics are increasingly compelling. Wyoming is a state built on extraction. Coal, oil, and natural gas have funded its government, employed its workers, and shaped its political culture for over a century. It has the smallest population of any state in the country, fewer than 600,000 people, and an economy that has been watching those extraction industries decline relative to their peak for years. The energy transition that the rest of the country is building toward is an existential question for Wyoming, a state that produces enormous amounts of carbon but also sits on some of the strongest wind resources in North America. The Chokecherry and Sierra Madre Wind Energy Project is Wyoming's answer to that question, at least in part. 600 wind turbines on 220,000 acres of public and private land in Carbon County, generating over 3,000 megawatts of electricity once fully built, making it the largest onshore wind farm in the country. The Power Company of Wyoming broke ground on the project in 2023 and is installing turbines in phases between 2025 and 2028. The wind in Carbon County is not subtle. Sustained speeds that make it one of the best wind resources on the continent, which is why this particular stretch of Wyoming has been in energy developers' plans for over 15 years. Getting that power to the people who need it requires the Transwest Express transmission line, a 732-mile high-voltage direct current line running from Wyoming through Colorado and Utah down to southern Nevada. The Bureau of Land Management approved construction in April 2023, and the groundbreaking ceremony happened in June 2023. Transwest Express is being built as the dedicated transmission infrastructure for the Chokecherry and Sierra Madre project and is expected to be operational around 2029 when the wind farm reaches full capacity. Together, the two projects represent a $6 billion bet that Wyoming can reinvent itself from a coal and gas state into a clean energy exporter, sending Wyoming wind to California solar markets and the desert Southwest. Alaska is unlike every other state in this video. It is the largest state by area and one of the smallest by population, a place of extraordinary natural resources and extraordinary logistical challenges, where building anything requires solving problems that don't exist anywhere else in the country. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline System, which has been carrying North Slope oil 800 miles from Prudhoe Bay to Valdez since 1977, is one of the great engineering achievements of the 20th century. It cost $8 billion to build at 1970s prices, took 70,000 workers 3 years to construct, and was designed specifically to survive earthquakes, permafrost shifts, and Arctic temperatures that can drop to minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The pipeline has been operating and being maintained ever since, with billions invested in its upkeep as oil production on the North Slope has gradually declined from its peak of 2 million barrels a day in the late 1980s. Alaska LNG is the attempt to write the next chapter. North Slope gas fields hold enormous reserves that have been largely stranded because the pipeline only moves oil, and there has never been a cost-effective way to get the gas to markets. A proposed $44 billion project would build an 800-mile gas pipeline from the North Slope to a liquefaction terminal at Nikiski on the Kenai Peninsula, where the gas would be converted to LNG and loaded onto tankers bound for Asian markets. Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan have all expressed serious interest in buying Alaskan LNG as part of their energy security strategies. The project has been in various stages of planning and near death for decades. Multiple ownership changes, financing collapses, and market shifts have killed earlier versions. The current iteration, now led by private developer Glenfarne Energy Transition, after taking a 75% stake from the state-owned Alaska Gas Line Development Corporation in early 2025, has moved faster than its predecessors. Baker Hughes signed on as a technology partner and investor in November 2025. Korean company POSCO International agreed to supply steel for the pipeline in September 2025. Front-end engineering and design was completed by December 2025. A final investment decision is anticipated in 2025 or 2026, with pipeline construction potentially beginning in late 2026 and first LNG targeted for the end of the decade. Alaska has heard these promises before. The project still needs to close financing, resolve permitting, and hold its cost estimates at a level that makes Alaskan LNG competitive with rival suppliers in Australia, Qatar, and the U.S. Gulf Coast. If it gets built, It changes Alaska's fiscal trajectory for a generation. If it doesn't, the state will face difficult decisions about its future much sooner than anyone wants. Hawaii. Hawaii built a rail system. This should not have been as difficult as it turned out to be. The island of Oahu has one of the worst traffic problems in the country relative to its size. A 44-mile-long island where 350,000 vehicles compete for road space, where a commute from the west side to Honolulu can take 90 minutes each way, and where every planner who has looked at the problem for the last half-century has reached the same conclusion. The island needs rail. The Honolulu Authority for Rapid Transportation broke ground in 2011 on an elevated automated light rail system that would run 20 miles from the suburban communities of East Kapolei on the west side through the airport, the urban core, and into downtown Honolulu. The original cost estimate was $5.26 billion. It is now approximately $10 billion. The original completion date was 2020. The system is still being built. In between those two data points sits one of the most troubled infrastructure project histories in American history. A story of contractor disputes, cost overruns, design changes, permitting fights, a global pandemic, federal funding freezes, and a succession of management crises that, at various points, threatened to kill the project entirely. What has emerged from all of this is a rail system that is genuinely opening. Segment 1, from East Kapolei to Aloha Stadium, opened to the public in June 2023. Segment 2, extending service through the airport and Pearl Harbor area to Kalihi, opened in October 2025. Segment 3, the $1.66 billion downtown phase covering 3 miles and 6 stations from Kalihi through Chinatown to the Civic Center in Kakako, broke ground in August 2025 with Tudor Perini as the contractor and a target completion of 2030. 2 more stations to Ala Moana Center, the original terminus, remain financially unfunded and indefinitely deferred, though Hart says it remains committed to eventually completing them. Ridership on the open segments is running well below initial projections, about 3,300 trips per weekday as of early 2025, which critics have seized on as evidence that the investment was misguided from the beginning. Supporters point out that ridership on new rail systems always builds gradually, and that the most important stations are the ones in downtown Honolulu that are still being built. What is certain is that Hawaii has spent a decade and $10 billion building something that is still only half finished. What happens in the next decade will determine whether that was a tragedy or a turning point. These were the biggest mega projects under construction in every state. But which one impressed you the most? And which state is winning the race for the future? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out our compilation on America's biggest mega projects under construction in 2026. Keep following Signum for more stories from the world of construction, and we will see you in the next video.